Ahoy fellow cosplay enthusiasts! Today I'm going to show you how I transformed into the fiery and fabulous Ace from One Piece. Buckle up because this is more than just a tutorial, it's a crafting saga of epic proportions. Let's start with the clothes. So for the shorts, I used a pair of overalls that I modified. I cut the top part and I turned that and sewed it in place. Then I rolled up the leg pieces and sewed that also into place. I used the leftover fabric that I cut off to create little belt loops on the waist and also on the left leg so that it could hold the little blue bag. Speaking of that blue bag, I made that using a flex foam fusible stabilizer that I had a scrap of. I traced out the pattern for the bag, then I sewed a piece of blue ultra preme to it. So to assemble it, I started by sewing the smaller side pieces, and then you should be left with something kind of like this. And then I sewed the side pieces, making any small notches that I needed to the fabric. Then you should have something kind of like this. Then you can turn it inside out and sew that leftover fabric on the flap. I also made a strap with the blue fabric, and all I did was top stitch it. I also added buttons, some snaps, and I also added that strap onto the back of the bag. So it is fully functional, and it also has a belt buckle. Next, I made the backpack using a tiger print fabric that I dyed green. I cut that into a rectangle that measures 40 by 17 inches and also used a soft gray leather which I cut into 7.5 by 40 inches. Once you have your pieces cut, then you want to fold down that gray fabric about 1.5 inches and sew it to the bottom of the tiger fabric rectangle. Then you're going to sew a 3¼ inch seam and cut off the seam flap on one side. Then cut off a little bit of the other side, turn that edge in and sew it down so that it can create a flat felled seam. Next, I cut out the oval that will be the bottom of the bag using that same gray fabric. Fold the oval in half so you can find the middle points and pin those to mark. Do the same with the bag so you can find the center front and center back points. Pin to mark. You want to match those up and then go ahead and pin all around the perimeter, making sure that the oval and your bag are the same size. Then go ahead and sew into place. Turn your bag inside out and you should be left with something like this. Find the center front of your bag and sew some bias shape to the very top. You should have something that looks like this. Fold it over, sew it, and this will leave you with a channel for your drawstring. Cut out the lining and top fabric of your flap, sew them together right sides facing each other. Make any notches, turn it inside out, and iron it. Turn the top edges in and sew shut. Next, find the middle point of the flap and pin it to mark it, as well as the center back of the bag. Match those up and sew the flap under the drawstring channel. Insert the drawstring onto the channel, and then you can add snaps to the flap and to the center front of the bag. For the backpack strap, cut a 7.5 by 37 inch rectangle out of the gray fabric. Fold the edges in, fold in half, then sew it shut and do some top stitching. Attach it to the center back of the bag at the top and at the bottom. I folded the edges in to give it a cleaner look, and of course you can make it as long as you would like. Then for the details, I made these buttons out of foam clay and pushed them into a painting tray. I cut the excess off and then I painted them with silver acrylic paint. Next is all of the accessories, starting with the elbow pad. For this, I harvested the fabric from an old purse. I just cut out 2 rectangles, one for the top, one for the lining, and then a smaller rectangle for the middle. This one was part of the bottom of the purse, but you can do this with craft foam and just cover it in fabric to give it that 3D raised look. For the straps, I cut 10 by 2¼ inch strips. Just fold the edges in and sew them down. Sew the 2 rectangles right sides facing each other together, leaving one side open. Turn it inside out Then tuck that open side in, sew shut. Then sew the smaller rectangle on top and attach the straps. Make sure that you measure it with your own arm. For the bracelet, I used a half circle foam dowel that I cut to the size that I wanted by measuring my wrist. I tried to make sure that it was big enough that I could just slide the bracelet on and off, and I wrapped it with white and red crochet thread alternating and then gluing it down. For the log pose, I made a foam clay ball the size that I wanted the globe to be, and then I heat formed clear Worbla on top of it, and I cut the excess off. For the inside, I cut out a piece of cardboard that was the same diameter as the globe, and I covered it with holographic sticker paper, and I poked a straight pin through the middle and folded the tip to the side. I attached a small red triangle to the pin, glued the circle to the globe, and then I covered the edges with studded trim and attached it to an old watch that I had, and I painted the straps blue. Next is the belt and knife. So for the knife, I used a reference photo that I found online, and I made my own template by enlarging the photo. I made the sheath using 5mm foam, and then I made the middle part with 10mm foam, which is just a 1/4-inch strip that I just glued to the perimeter, and then the other side with 5mm foam. Then the knife is 2 layers of 5mm foam. Then I added 5mm foam to each side of the handle. And then I glued everything using contact cement, and then I sanded all of the edges down. That way everything was totally smooth. So once everything was smooth, I went ahead and covered the knife part with silver sparkly vinyl, which was totally an experiment. I covered the handle with fabric, and then I embellished it with buttons and trim. Then for the sheath, I covered that with fabric, and then I made a separate strip that I covered also with fabric, and then I attached it to the top of the sheath. I used trim on the edges, made brown strips to go around, and then I added the same silver embellishments that I added to the backpack and added a little belt loop. Then for the belt buckle, I first printed the shape out using heavy cardstock, cut it out so that just the A and the corner details were left, and then I painted everything with red acrylic paint. I glued everything onto a 5mm rectangle with the same size as my printout, and then I covered it with that same silver vinyl, and then I embellished all of the edges using more studded trim and added belt loops to the back. Then for the belt, I measured around my waist and around one side of my hip, and I cut out the 5mm foam to the length and width that I wanted. I covered it in stretchy ombre fabric that I had, and then added some studded trim to the top. And then I added snaps so that it would snap from one edge to the center back and then the other edge to the center front, and anything that was exposed I covered with more trim. Then of course is the iconic hat and necklace. For the necklace, I just used wooden red beads, and I just strung these onto elastic. That way I can just put it right over my head. Then for the hat, I started by making the ram and bones out of foam clay and 5mm foam. Then the faces, I made 2 circles out of 5mm foam, and then I cut out all of the top details out of 2mm foam. And all I did was put those right on top and glued those with contact cement. I then covered these with Worbla, and all that I did was get a piece of the Worbla, placed it right on top, and then used my heat gun to melt that Worbla. And then I used a silicone face spatula to push in all of the details, and that way it wouldn't burn my fingers. I tucked all of the edges in, and then I added another layer of 5mm foam onto it. For the main hat part, I cut out all the hat pieces out of 5mm foam using patterns I made, making sure to mark the center front and center back of all the pieces. I assembled the hat starting with the top and middle parts using contact cement, making sure that the two center front pieces matched, then working my way around to the center back. Then I added contact cement to the bottom of that middle piece and to the top edge of the hat brim. Once that is dry, start by attaching the pieces with the center front, working all the way around to the center back. Do this slowly and carefully. Once that is done, then you can go ahead and heat form so that it gives the hat a more realistic shape. Then you can go ahead and seal and paint with acrylics. Next, you want to poke holes on the center parts of the sides using a skewer, and then add whatever string you want to use. For this, I used the shoelace, making sure that the string isn't loose, and then I added all of the hat embellishments. I painted mine with acrylics and added small loops where necessary. Next, add the beads to the top by stringing them on elastic and gluing them down onto the hat. I also added the faces by attaching small foam triangles to the backs, and that helped to anchor them onto the hat. Also, I made the little red tassel out of wig hair that I had from an old wig. I hope this crafting odyssey brought you laughs, inspiration, maybe a few aha moments, and of course, big thank you to Spear Eyes for giving me the yellow bathing suit I wore with this cosplay. Subscribe, follow, and stay tuned for more cosplay adventures, and until next time, happy crafting!